So it's pretty easy to get caught up in the latest, fastest, most powerful hardware, but what if you're just not interested in spending a ton of cash on a gaming PC? Outside of getting lucky with secondhand deals or hand-me-downs from your friends, your next best bet is probably a Ryzen APU, a quad-core CPU with relatively powerful onboard graphics. Today we're going to confirm whether that is the case and what sort of performance you can expect by gaming solely on one of these processors, and how this compares to a couple of budget discrete graphics cards. So the new APUs in question are the Ryzen 3200G and 3400G, and although they both carry the 3000 series naming, they still operate on the Zen Plus architecture from the second generation. The difference comes in the form of a factory overclock for both the CPU and GPU. Core and thread count, TDP, and cache remain the same, but the third generation APUs get a nice plus 300 MHz on the CPU's boost clock and plus 150 MHz on the Vega GPU. As we already know though, these APUs can be overclocked, and so it'll be interesting to see what the value proposition actually is against the 2000 series generation APUs like the 2200G. To put it plainly, pricing these days for both the 2200G and 2400G are pretty competitive against the newer models. Overall, the quad-core, quad-threaded 3200G can be had for $95 US, and the 8-threaded 3400G with slightly beefier graphics comes in at around $145. For some perspective on performance, we're going to see how the performance of these APUs compares to something like a GTX 1650 and also the well-lived RX 570. Both of these are under $150 US at the time of filming and still in abundance from what I can see from Amazon. The RX 570 is what you'll want to be paying close attention to here though. All testing was done on a B450 motherboard. That would personally be my choice when looking at these budget processors to unlock faster memory speeds and overclocking. Just make sure that the BIOS comes updated, or then it can be updated with a compatible CPU. That's something that a lot of beginners seem to overlook. Before we dive into the gaming benchmarks, I want to run you guys through overclocking. In the case of the Ryzen APUs, you can overclock both the CPU and GPU silicon by a worthwhile amount. The main thing that I wanted to see here though was whether I could overclock my 2200G to the same speeds as my 3200G, but the newer silicon seems to overclock a couple hundred megahertz higher. Overclocking is definitely recommended here, seeing as we are going to be clawing at as many frames as possible. So let's start off looking at some 900p testing first, just with the APUs in the graph, and then we'll take a look at the discrete GPU performance with 1080p in just a minute. But at 900p resolution, gaming with these processors is possible if you're prepared to drop the settings quite a bit. All of the testing shown here was with the graphics settings dropped as low as possible, with the exception of the resolution scale. If you want to push above 60 FPS in the new Apex Legends update, that's Season 3, an overclocked 2200G or 3200G can get the job done, and I did actually play a couple of rounds here with the overclocked 3200G, it is totally possible. The 3400G does provide a much better experience, about 15% faster when compared to the overclocked 3200G, but also at over 50% higher cost. Rainbow Six Siege is playable on these budget processors. Even the super budget 2200G at stock can push above 60 FPS on average in this title, and considering that processor is just $80 at the time of filming, that is not bad at all. Frequency seemed to play quite a large role in this title. Specifically, overclocking the CPU portion of the chip allows it to be less of a bottleneck once we start approaching these higher frame rates. I think that's why we're seeing the overclocked 3200G so close to the stock 3400G. Proiect Cars 2 played well also, but I will note that this game did look quite terrible with the minimum graphics settings, but we'll talk more about this towards the end. The results are pretty close here between the stack. Ultimately, the Ryzen 5 3400G is not looking like a super appealing option considering the price hike over something like an overclocked 2200G, at least in this title. When it comes to a demanding AAA title like Battlefield 5, playing with onboard graphics really is going to be a struggle. Here we're not even close to hitting the 60 FPS mark, even with an overclocked 3400G. So yeah, while these processors can handle esports and less demanding titles quite well at 900p with the lowest settings, some titles are just going to be kind of unplayable. So you can totally use these powerful APUs for gaming at 900p with reduced quality settings, but gaming at 1080p resolution just isn't worth the trade-off in the reduced frame rate. For some context, an 8GB RX 570, which can be had brand new for around $140 US or used for around 80 to 100, can basically play this game at an average of 144 FPS when paired with an overclocked 3400G. Plugging in a budget discrete GPU like the RX 570, it's a game changer completely. We're looking at well over a 2x performance increase. The overclocked 3400G was the only APU instance that could somewhat confidently play at 1080p in my opinion, able to maintain above 60 FPS most of the time. For the 3200G, it's just not something worth considering at 1080p unless you're playing seriously easy to run titles. And there's no reason that you can't start off with something like a 3200G or so, overclock it, game on that for a few weeks while you save some money and hunt down some RX 570 deals, and then drop that into your system. The other thing that a relatively powerful budget GPU allows you to do is raise your quality settings a few notches. Shadows and lighting will look a lot better if that's something that you care about, and anti-aliasing is something that you can actually consider enabling. Some games are actually going to look okay with the minimum settings, Overwatch and Apex Legends being an example with the exception of raising the texture settings there. If you are considering the 3200G or 3400G to build an APU gaming system, I'd also consider the 2200G and 2400G, seeing as the pricing has dropped there. Overclocking the 2200G can bring it pretty close to 3200G performance when that's overclocked, but if you want to spend the extra pocket change on the 3200G, then definitely feel free. I personally wouldn't consider buying the 3400G for an APU gaming system due to the steep pricing at $145 US, especially when you consider that you can get a 6-core R5 2600 at the moment for around $120. The 3400G is kind of cool and novel, being the fastest graphics that you can currently get from an APU and a single chip only, but it's probably not worth it for most of you. If you are in a position where you can save a bit of money on a week-to-week basis, then I'd definitely go for a used RX 570 or similar. Otherwise, the 2200G or 3200G is definitely where it's at in terms of value, and at 900p resolution you can definitely get some capable gaming performance. If you are interested in any of the parts discussed today, you can find them linked down below in the description. As always, a huge thanks for watching, subscribe down below if you haven't already, and I will see you all in the next one.